happiness. Everybody on earth wants to be happy.
Right.
But how many people are actually happy?
Right, that's the issue, that there's so much unhappiness in the world. Happiness is so elusive, it seems, to so many different people. And you know what people do? They drown out their unhappiness with entertainment. We're living in an age of addiction. And addiction is not just restricted to alcohol or drugs, but entertainment for people to have fun. And that way they take their minds off their unhappiness. So I think what we have to find explanations for is, why are people so unhappy? And then how do you become happy? How do you reach that happiness?
And not just instant gratification, but something that's sustainable and permanent.
Right, so we talk about the pursuit of happiness. That's in our Declaration of Independence. I think the pursuit of happiness is one of the reasons why we don't have happiness, because people are obsessed with the pursuit and have no idea of what true happiness really is.
So, like they say, every time you see another best-selling book, it's 10 Secrets to Happiness, it's not going to work. That's why they keep being bestsellers, because if they finally had one that worked. So you think there's a slam dunk formula?
I think when we go to Jewish sources, the Torah sources, we find why people are unhappy and what is the recipe for happiness. First of all, I just realized that the Talmud tells us that there are 10 words for happiness in Hebrew. So that means happiness was a very major topic in Jewish life.
Like the Eskimos have 70 names for snow.
Right.
When you're intimate with it, you have
we
many
have
names.
10 words for happiness. There's not even one word for fun in Hebrew. The modern Israelis borrowed a word from Arabic, kef, for fun. But it's not a Hebrew word. It doesn't exist.
Schok or tzchak?
Schok is laughter.
Okay.
It's laughter, which is another expression of happiness. But laughter is not a same thing as fun. Fun is a diversion from happiness. It's not that fun is a bad thing in and of itself. People sometimes need to drown out their misery temporarily, so they can get their footing and work towards true happiness. But when fun becomes the goal, and entertainment becomes it's an obsession. I mean, it's unbelievable how many people have to have how many hundreds of channels on their TV. They have to watch every movie. They have to constantly have the television on, or now it's the internet. And this is detracting from true happiness.
Yeah, well, I find dealing with people, you always want to look at, to try to get to the root core of happiness. You look at, where is it natural? Look, children.
Right.
Children are born happy. Unfortunately, sometimes, but it's an anomaly. But a child is naturally happy.
Right. When a child is happy, you don't ask, why are you happy? When an adult is happy with a smile on his face, there's something wrong with this guy. Why is this person smiling so much?
So I always say, just starting on a very simple level, and a child, it's not because the child has all the options, like you said, every channel and every menu and every recipe on earth. It's because the child is comfortable in his own skin or her own skin, and it just knows where I am right now is where I should be. And it's not, as you said, the pursuit of happiness. It's a state of being rather than an action. Many people think, if I do this, I'll become happy. Right. And you find the really happy people are just not, that's who they are. Right. You don't have to say I'm a happy person. The person's content, comfortable in their own skin, a certain inner confidence.
Yeah, I think that the reason why children are naturally happy, I think there are actually 3 reasons for it. Number 1, happiness is actually the default position of a human being. It should be the default position. That a person should be naturally happy, because a person has a soul, which is a part of God, and God is identified with joy, which is something that needs to be explained, of course. So a child has this default position of being happiness and didn't become an adult yet where that default position is covered up. Secondly, a child is not self-conscious. A child doesn't think of himself. It's just a natural being, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And thirdly, a child is sinless. The Talmud talks about how the breath of a child who studies Torah sustains the world. So one of the rabbis said, what about, are we chopped liver? What about our Torah study? And the other one says, but the child's breath is sinless. So a child doesn't have the things that cover up true happiness. And therefore the child is naturally in a state of happiness. Child, I think they say, laughs about 300 to 400 times a day. Adults between 10 and 15 times a day, if even that.
Yeah. Well, I would, taking from there, I would add also the word security. People are secure with themselves and not looking for that affirmation or I want to be like somebody else. Once you have, in other words, you're generating from within your own certain self confidence and self-esteem is a critical thing. What you were saying, I think the people who seek fun or entertainment or are numbing themselves or escaping is they're not secure with themselves. So they say, oh, if I did this, I'll be happy. If I traveled here, I'd be happy. If I smoked this, if I did that. And of course, the advertising world just feeds that. You do this and you'll be, look at this happy looking guy. You want to be like that? Smoke a cigar,
People think they have needs and they have to satisfy those needs. That'll make them happy. But as soon as they satisfy those needs, they discover they have more needs.
Yeah.
And I think if you want to give a recipe to reverse that, there's a story of one of the great Hasidic masters, the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe. One of his followers came to him with a whole list of things that he needs. I need this, and I need that, and whatever was health and sustenance. And the Alter Rebbe says, you give me a whole list of things, what you need, but why you're needed, you fail to mention.
Right.
The Chassid fainted. When he was revived, it changed his whole life. If people realize that they're needed, because that's something that if you ask the average person, why are you needed? Could the world get along without your existence? Most people couldn't give a good answer. And that's why they're not happy. If a person would just focus on, I'm a purposeful creation. God created me with a purpose, and I'm needed. And if I'm needed, that means there's value to my life. So I'm happy.
That's what goes back to the soul. I think at the end of the day, if you're a body-minded person and everything's materialistic, materialism by definition is insecure because nothing lasts. Whereas purpose and meaning and soulfulness and the fact that you were put here with a very deliberate, absolute reason, you're indispensable, right, gives you that. At the end of the day, you cannot really permanently be happy if you don't have something permanent to hold on to. If you're like at sea and there's a storm and you're just being thrust about, you no way that you can feel secure. When you have something to hold on to, what you're saying, purpose, meaning, divine purpose. And ironically, paradoxically, that's what people think. They think, if I take more, I become happier. The truth is when you give more, service. There's no question about it, but it goes against, it's counterintuitive. People think, what do you mean? If I'm giving up my time and serving, I don't have time to be happy. And it's the exact opposite. Right. I mean, wherever you see the wisdom of the sages, Judaism, of course, is an example, thousands of years. It always comes down to, you're unhappy, go help somebody. It never says you're not happy, go find something that will make you happy. Go do something that will serve, that will help. You see it all the time, absolutely.
People wish each other happy birthday. They don't even realize what they're saying. What's the happiness of the birthday? The truth is, I don't know who is the first author of this. I think it was Nachman of Breslov, a great Hasidic master, who said that the day that you're born is the day that God says, this world cannot exist without you. That's why it's happy birthday, because you realize that the world needs you. We're needed. And a person gets the tremendous sense of fulfillment when they know that they're needed.
Unfortunately, many children growing up in homes of parents that I would say invalidated them and made them feel demoralizing them. So you turn into an adult and you feel like, I never made my parents happy and I'm not going to make people happy. So what we do is we distract ourselves. So that's the challenge. If someone grew up in an environment where they were told, God needs you, God created you, every morning you say Moda'ani, which is that prayer, thank you for returning my soul to me, giving me purpose. But what about when you get into a situation where that was not your environment, that was not the message. The message was, you're only going to make us happy if you make a lot of money, or if you'll be a doctor or a lawyer, or you're going to perform well. And like contending with that type of materialistic form of happiness, to find spiritual happiness, is a real challenge because it's not neutral. Every second of the day, people are telling you, please me and you'll be happier, make more money, you'll be happier.
You see, it's interesting, you're saying that when people feel worthless, they have no purpose, they're not happy. But the flip side of that is that people's egos cause them not to be happy. A person who has an inflated ego thinks that the whole world is there for him or her, and that they don't have enough. They're entitled to everything. That's why gratitude and happiness go hand in hand. Who's a grateful person? A happy person. Who's a happy person? Who's a grateful person? Why is a person an ingrate? Because they feel, I'm entitled to that. You didn't do me a favor. You owed it to me. God owes me everything. I'm so great. I'm so wonderful. So you're never grateful. If you have your ego is in check, then you're, wow, I didn't deserve this. I'm so thrilled that someone decided to give this to me. And when Adam and Eve partook of the forbidden fruit, which by the way wasn't an apple, that's the myth, but whatever it was, they ate of the forbidden fruit. And what did Adam do after that? That was the first real sin, because Adam and Eve's eating of the fruit, that was all orchestrated. God made it almost impossible for them not to do it, which is another subject for another time. But right after, when God confronts Adam, what does he do? He says, it's not my fault. It's the woman you gave me. It's her fault because you gave me this person. Instead of saying to God, thank you, giving me a helpmate, giving me a spouse, giving me a partner in life, he was ungrateful. And that happened when he became self-conscious. That goes back to what we said before, that when a person is self-conscious and their focus is always on their own needs and their own wants, they're going to be very unhappy and ungrateful. And at a wedding ceremony, we have one of the blessings, we ask God to bring joy to the bride and bridegroom the way that Adam and Eve were given joy in the Garden of Eden before the sin. Before the sin, they were the most joyous people, the most happy people. The sin made them miserable because they became self-conscious. And when your focus is on your ego, then you're not going to be happy.
There's a powerful discourse by, you mentioned before, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, founder of Chabad, where he talks about how true happiness goes hand in hand with humility. If you don't have humility, you can't be truly happy. And most people don't think of it that way. They think of humility as for the downtrodden, for the people who are like all very withdrawn. And happiness is, you're expansive and you're aggressive and so on, which of course goes back to the definition of happiness, that when the person is humble, which means humble in their understanding of their role in this world, instead of feeling a sense of entitlement, me, and it's more like you, I'm here to give, I'm here to serve. That humility is always, you see any person, and I challenge anyone to go out there, find a happy person, a truly happy person. You'll see it has nothing to do with how wealthy or because you have wealthy people that are miserable people, you have poor people that are very happy. It has nothing to do with their circumstance. It has to do with their attitude. And the attitude is one of a sense of modesty, humility. I answer to a higher truth, a higher reality. The people, as soon as the focus is not on themselves, that's the direct proportion to that is always going to be a more long-term happiness.
I heard a story that someone wrote a letter to our Rabbi with all their problems and their misery and their sadness and their depression and everything. And the Rebbe's answer was he just took every time this person wrote the word I, which was repeated over and over, and the Rebbe circled it. And that was the answer.
Yeah.
You take the focus off the I, then all those issues will be either disappear or you'll be able to accommodate them into your life. It won't distract you. It won't deter you from living a full life.
The mere fact that in Judaism, in the Torah, it says, serve God with joy. So like people ask the question, 1 minute, I'm not happy. How could you command, you can regulate actions, you can't regulate feelings. But that goes back to the point that we discussed earlier, because if joy is actually your natural state, no, we're not talking about forcing you to be joyous when you're not. Even a sad person could have a certain element of happiness. It's just expressed in different ways. I think it's more than just, see, people think happiness is just someone goes through the motions, it looks good. When the fact is there are a lot of people that are acting happy and they're really miserable inside. And there are people who can be very somber, but truly be content. I mean, talk about the Rabbi, sometimes you saw even in very serious moments. But there was always a certain, not the right word for it, maybe inner contentment, inner peace, which goes so much with happiness. Happiness is not always making somersaults and dancing and singing. That's one expression of it. But it can also be in a very, you could be on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, and still have a fundamental serenity and peace and inner serenity and inner joy and inner happiness.
Right. It says about Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, those are days of trembling. It says Gilu, rejoice in the trembling.
Right.
That even on the surface, it's a day of judgment, you're praying, you're asking God for forgiveness. But underneath that, there's a certain sense of joy because you know that, number one, that God is going to forgive you. That God is a good God and He's going to judge us fairly. God is our Father and He's going to treat us like a child. And we have that confidence that makes us very happy. So we may not express it overtly, but it's there underlying everything. You have that happiness.
I use an example for this always. It's like when you're standing in front of a wonder, one of the wonders of nature, or a beautiful piece of art, or listening to music, and you completely lose yourself. You're mesmerized and enthralled by the experience. So you're standing in awe, but there's a profound happiness going on.
Sure.
It's not happiness, in other words, it's not about me, it's about the experience. It's like essentially, I don't say the word surrendering, but you're absorbed, like they say, being in the zone. You're absorbed by a higher thing. Whenever I study my grandchildren or children in general, you see that, we've talked before about children, you see that they don't have that, you call it self-consciousness. They're just there. They're in the moment. They know they belong. And they're not like trying to please somebody or perform. That whole world of adult life where you need to perform. Because someone is expecting something or someone's demanding something or you feel you won't be accepted. That entire idea really does not, that feeds the opposite of happiness and true contentment,
I think people want to know, how can I become happy? So, first of all, based on everything we said, it needs to change our mindset about life, about our existence. We can't look at life the way we do. We have to realize that we were created with a purpose, and we're part of that purpose, and every one of us is indispensable. That's the only way you could really reach happiness, when you change your mindset. But it's not easy to change your mindset. That's the challenge.
Yeah, because look, today we have millions of options. As you mentioned before, you go on your mobile phone or internet, you can press any button and you keep browsing and surfing to find some momentary instant gratification. And the Talmud says a very powerful statement, which is really almost absurd, that people prefer temporary life over permanent life. If someone would say to you, here, the next hour you could have total pleasure, but the rest of your life will be miserable, most people will choose that over a long-term. It's the absurdity of the human condition. We like instant things. It looks good right now. How you change that? That's, of course, that's the biggest challenge, because it doesn't begin with happiness. It begins with mindset. Right. It begins with an attitude.
We have to devote time. I mean, there are practical ways of generating happiness. I mean, if we start to sing a joyous melody or start dancing, it gets us into a happy mood. Sometimes action has the capacity to generate feelings. Talking positively about people, about things. We shouldn't wallow in the negativity of the world. There's a beautiful book called Positivity Bias about how to develop it, which is the Rebbe's philosophy, how to develop a positive bias. The first thing you see is the positive side of things. Yes, we know there's negative. No one denies that, but you don't see the negative first. The first thing that registers in your mind is the positive. When you see things in a positive light, that also helps to make you happy, because happiness and positivity go hand in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share a story that there was a guy coming to one of my classes, and I saw he was always sit in the back, listen, take notes. Then one day he finally approaches me. He was a very good-looking young guy. He was probably in his early 30s. And I saw he came from wealth and privilege. You could see from his demeanor. Very fine person. And he says to me, "Can I speak to you privately?" I said, "Sure." He says, make a long story short, I grew up in a home of privilege. My father's a billionaire. He mentioned his name, well-known person. He says, "But I'm the most miserable person on earth. I have everything I want, but I'm in a gilded cage. I can go anywhere. I could travel anywhere, anything to purchase. I don't even have one concern, anything. But I'm not a happy person. I've been listening to your classes, and I like the idea of going into the soul, but I don't know how I can make a shift." I said, "Are you ready to say no to all the money?" And he says, "No, it's impossible. Maybe for a day. It won't last." So I said to him, "You know what? I'll be honest with you. Unless you're ready to sacrifice something, you're just going to be trapped in your comforts, in your sense of entitlement." But then, as we're speaking, I said to him, "I have a suggestion to you." I said, "Volunteer. You have time on your hands." Yeah, he's all the time in the world. Volunteer once a week. Go to a home of special children, and take a walk with a child that has Down syndrome or something, and just go walk in the park. His first reaction was, "No, I'll hire someone to do that." I said, No. You have to do it." And the more he resisted, the more. And then, to his credit, he went and did it. He was very uncomfortable because why would he do something like that? Came back to me a few weeks later. He said, "The greatest idea. I love it. The child doesn't even know who I am. And the love I get from him is more than I give. I'm just there. And it's such a beauty." And anyway, months passed. He started doing it several times a week. And now he's telling me that he's going to be building a special home for children because he learned the ropes. So he says, "I have a cause." And
it's an incredible story.
Yeah, a cause. Once he had that cause, and it wasn't about me taking, so he didn't have to give up his wealth. Let him go build something for others. It's the giving, the knowing that you have a purpose. I mean, we said it before, and you said it very eloquently. I think it's not part of our culture. We don't think that way.
No, and unfortunately, we're not giving, when I say we, I mean the American institutions of education are not giving children that sense of purposefulness. There's no religion in the schools. There's nothing there to motivate someone to want to find purpose in life.
Yeah, and service. It's not about serving. It's about me and seeing how I can benefit from everyone. Yeah, you have to be civil and cordial, but it's not the idea of
even in the advertisements on the radio, I listen. They'll sell a certain product. They says, "You deserve it." Everything is, "You deserve it." A lawyer advertises his service. "You deserve to be represented by me, so you can win money, so that everyone's insurance rates go up."
In my book, Torah Meaningful Life, I write a line that's similar to what you said before, that birth is God saying you matter. And I always, that means that God put you here. You matter. You're valuable by the mere existence, not because you're performing or not because something happened. You matter. You're needed and so on. So I point out always that you never see that on billboards. Nobody's going to tell you because they're not selling anything. You don't need anything to know that you were born. That's God's gift to you. And it's right there. It's like, in other words, happiness is not out there. You don't need to purchase something. You just have to access. Michelangelo has that beautiful statement. He said, they asked him, how did he sculpt these beautiful angels in the marble? And he said, I saw the angels trapped in the marble, and I carved and set them free. And people don't realize, they think happiness is you're going to get it somewhere. It's your birthright. It's right inside of you. You just have to carve the externals, the marble or the concrete or other substances that don't let you access your own beauty, basically.
Right, and also in general, just by leading a moral life, and for Jewish people for following the commandments, the mitzvot, that connects you to God, and God is the source of happiness. But what does that mean, God is the source of happiness? And what is the definition, deeper definition of happiness? In Hebrew, the word for happiness, well, there are 10 words, but one of them, the most common word, is simcha. And there's an expression that simcha poritz geder. Simcha, this is a Hasidic expression based on a Talmudic expression about a king, that a king in the olden days had the power to break through barriers. Right. Wherever he had to travel, he didn't have to go around. He could just go straight and break through people's fences. And this Hasidic master borrowed that expression and said it applies to joy, to simcha, to happiness. What does that mean? That means that there are certain states of mind, certain feelings that are occluded, that are covered up, that are in a prison. And when you are in a state of joy, you can break out of those. There's a prison or barriers between your mind and your feelings, between your feelings and your behavior, and between one person and another. You know, you don't get along with someone. Usually, if you're a happy person, you'll get along with more people. If you're a really a morbid person, a person who's always complaining and sad and miserable, you're going to make everyone miserable.
Yeah.
Someone once said that your face is public property. You have to smile because your frown is going to make someone else's life miserable. So simcha is the breaking out of the boundaries, the things that lock up your emotions and your spirituality. And God is the ultimate source of breaking out of boundaries. God has no limits. So that's the state of joy, is the natural state for God. And when you are joyous, you have that divine energy inside of you to break through barriers.
You remind me of an anecdote I read recently. This little farm boy who never was in the city and never saw any of modern technologies suddenly comes to a home, a mansion. He sees mirrors. He never saw a mirror before. You know, mirrors, we take it for granted, but there was a world once without mirrors. And he looks in the mirror and he gets all disturbed. He runs to the host, to the owner of the house. He says, I looked into the glass and I see a child making mean faces to me. So the owner said, if you smile to the child, he'll smile back. You know, there's no question about it. When you're around people that are happy, that it's contagious, and the opposite is also true. A happy person projects happy energy, and you generate it. It's all about you. It's not like people say, if good things happen to me, I'll be happy. I say, no, if you're happy, good things will happen to you. In that sense, it's
so the happiness, number one, makes your life more meaningful, enriches your life. It's healthier. I'm sure there's a lot of medical evidence that people who are happy are healthier. It helps to bring out positive emotions. It makes you get along with other people much more successfully than without happiness. And it's the cure for a lot of different emotional ailments.
Look at the antithesis, anxiety.
Right.
And what it does to health.
But what some people are going to say, you know, rabbis, you know, you're talking in theory, but when your life is really miserable, when someone who you love is very ill and they're on the verge of dying, and all the tsaros, the misfortunes that people experience, you know, it's easy for us to say because thank God we don't have any problems. Or we
Speak for yourself.
You know the story of Reb Zusha, the famous Hasidic master. Someone came to his teacher, the Maggid of Misfortune, the second Hasidic leader, and said, I heard it says in the Talmud that a person should accept suffering the same way they accept good things with the same joy. I can't understand that. I can't accept that. Explain it to me. And he said, go to my student Zusha. Zusha lived at the outskirts of town in a broken down shack. He comes in, he sees poverty, he sees people dressed in rags, no furniture. And he sees a man with a smile on his face and he says, what can I do for you? He says, well, your teacher sent me to you to ask you the question, how could you accept misfortune or difficulties in life with joy? He says, I'm surprised that he sent you to me because I never experienced anything negative in my life.
Right, exactly.
So some people could be at that level, but most of us are not at that level. Most people go through real difficulties in every imaginable way, and you just have to look now. On my internet, there's just, you get notices of people who are asking for help, financial help, because their daughter is dying, and this one broke bones. I mean, and most of those stories are true. And of course, you'd like to give everyone donations for all this. So much, you realize there's so much misery in the world. How do we reconcile that with everything we're saying about happiness? I have a hard time finding
It's
the
the
best
$1 million
explanation.
question. It's easy to talk about until it happened. Like the famous story where a guy came to his teacher and asked him, how could you be happy when there's sad things? And he gave him all the explanations. It's hidden good, and then God has deeper reasons. And then finally he told him, long story short, that he suffered a tragedy. He says, you can start dancing. So he fainted instead of dancing. When it happens to you.
Right.
So,
it's easy to talk about in theory, but in practice, it's...
well, I think one of the most powerful lessons we can take from the Jewish people, and I've had this question asked to me many times, Jews have suffered greatly, maybe more than any people. Going back, talking about almost the beginning of our history, the Egyptian exile, then we had to deal with the Assyrians, and we had to deal with the Babylonians and the Romans and you name it, Spanish. I mean, there wasn't a time, of course, the Holocaust. And yet you see Jews as a whole have laughter, smiling, happiness. You see I remember my grandmother suffered greatly, but she always had that smile on her face. And that's not theory. How did they, I've seen people gone through tragedies, and I'm not saying they cry more than anybody, but there's something that they hold on to that seems to give them that extra strength. I mean, Viktor Frankl, in his Man's Search for Meaning, talked about meaning, purpose, which doesn't mean you suffer less. It just means you have more resources to hold on to, so it's not going to completely destroy you. And that, there's no question, that is the trick. When somebody suffers, you can't just tell them, hey, be happy. Sometimes you just have to hold their hand and be empathetic and be with them. And it's going to ultimately come down to digging and finding greater strengths. And that's where the real happiness is real discovered. I mean, it's easy to be happy when, as you said, everything is going well. Can you be happy when things are challenging?
Right. People who have genuine happiness when things do go well are much better equipped to deal with tragedy, God forbid, if it happens, because they have a different perspective on life.
I once heard that one of the reasons that we break a glass under the chuppah, that high moment of the greatest happiness and joy, why do you have to be reminded of destruction? There are plenty of other times you can remember. And I once heard, I don't remember who said it, but I thought it was a very powerful insight, that when you remember those that are broken in times of your great happiness, so when you go through something that is a break, you too will not be 100%, it'll be the joy that still remains. In other words, it's not, always be humble in your happiness and your joy, and as well as in your sadness, because sadness could also become overcome. The sadness controls you instead of you recognizing that there's a deeper element to it. But again, it's easier said than done. The story, what's the story with the two brothers, Elimelech and Zusha, with the prison?
Yeah.
Might as well tell it. So they were in prison, and one of them was very sad, and his brother said to him, "Why are you sad?" He says, "Because it's now weeks that I can't make a blessing, because in the cell, in the prison, there's the bathroom, and you're not allowed to make a blessing where there's a bathroom." So his brother said to him, "What do you mean? That you're also fulfilling God's mitzvah. He's telling you not to make a blessing in a time." So he says, "You're right." He gets up and starts dancing, and the whole prison, all the inmates are dancing. Everybody's dancing. The guard, the angry guard, comes running. He says, "Why is everybody dancing?" They say, "The Jew is dancing, so we're also dancing." "Why is he dancing?" "Something to do with the pail in his room." So he says, "Okay, I'll show you." And he pulls out the pail, and then, of course, he can make the blessing. It's
a classic story, and it's a very powerful one, because it shows that there's no such thing as a place or a time or a situation in which you can't have a relationship with God.
Right. Exactly. And that means even in the darkest moments, there's light. There's some light, and it doesn't take away the sadness, but it gives you the hope that they tell. I don't know if it was the Bluzhin or one of the Rebbes. He was during the Holocaust. He was in one of the camps and had some of his Hasidim, some of his followers. And these camps, they weren't just murder camps. They were also they were like beasts. They dehumanized the Jews, and so they had this. The commander there had this particular cruel game that he played. He had the Jews dig these wide trenches, and said, "Okay, they start playing music. Whoever jumps over the trench lives. Whoever doesn't gets shot right on the spot." So one of the Hasidim, one of the disciples of his Rebbe says, enough is enough of this misery. Let's just allow ourselves to be killed. Go back to God in heaven. And the Rebbe said, no, as long as you're alive, you have to fight. You never know God's mysterious plans. So anyway, the game, so to speak, begins. And in the havoc and the mayhem, nobody knows who survived, who didn't survive. A few weeks later, they were liberated. And lo and behold, both the Rebbe and his chassid survived. They meet. And they were both surprised to see each other. And the chassid says to the Rebbe, to his Rebbe, he says, you're not a young man, how did you jump over the trench? He says, I closed my eyes and I held on to the kapota, to the coattails of my father and my grandfather and my great-grandfather and the generations, and it gave me the strength to jump. And he said to the chassid, you're also not a young man. How did you jump? He says, I held on to your coattails. So the idea that we're not alone and that we have inner strengths is again, the word happiness maybe has to be used with discretion, but it still gives you the strength to overcome, that there's no challenge that cannot be overcome.
Right. Happiness can only be achieved if a person has a belief in God, number one, and has a belief that God is aware of everything that goes on in our lives, and that God loves us and cares for us, and ultimately will do everything in His power to make our lives, to correct all the bad things. And that's our belief in the Messianic age and the coming of Mashiach. And it's interesting, the word Mashiach has the same letters as the word for rejoicing. Yismach, he will rejoice. Or Yisamach, he will make others rejoice. Because the ultimate goal is his happiness, true happiness, authentic happiness. The psalmist says, Oz yimale schayk pinu, then our mouths will be filled with laughter. Only then, only in the Messianic age. Today we can be happy, but our happiness is not going to be complete until God's presence will be fully revealed. As long as God is hiding behind a barrier, that's the antithesis of joy. Joy is when you break out of barriers. As soon as God breaks out of the barrier that He imposed, which we call galut, exile, then the joy will be so incredible. And how do we prepare for that? By being happy.
Yeah. Okay, another way of putting it, what you're saying is galut, exile is like displacement. When you're displaced, there's no way you could be happy. It's when you know you belong, a seamlessness. Like when Mashiach comes, there'll be a seamless. You know this is exactly where you need to be. Without that real seamlessness, you never could be a happy person, because there's always, maybe subconsciously, a sense, I'm not really where I belong, I'm not doing what I should be doing. That idea, if people knew today exactly that I know what I need to be doing right now is what is the purpose of my life, there's no greater source for happiness. As long as you don't know that, you're going to be, going back to what we spoke, you're going to be constantly groping for something that will fill that void.
I think one of the causes of anxiety, it could be many causes, but one of the causes, I think, is the fact that we have a soul. Whether we recognize it or not, we all have a soul. The soul wants to go in this direction. We're going in the other direction. And the soul says, I have a purpose. I want you to take me in the right direction. And you're going off in the wrong direction. Yeah. So it has anxiety that it's not going to be able to fulfill its mission in this world. That's why the soul came down, to fulfill a mission. So what happens? The conscious mind doesn't understand what the soul wants. So the conscious mind thinks it wants entertainment, wants some pleasure, physical pleasure, sensual pleasure.
Right.
There's a famous parable in the Midrash about the princess who falls in love with a gardener, and they elope. And the gardener loves her, and he provides her with potatoes and carrots and onions and turnips and what have you, and she's not happy because she missed the life of a princess in the palace.
Right. And
he says to her, my dear, my love, why are you so unhappy? I'm giving you everything, everything that I value. He says, that's the problem. It's what you value. You don't know what I value.
Right.
And the soul feels that same way, and it causes us to be unhappy and anxious. So depression and anxiety, all these emotional problems that I think are being reported now more than ever before. I think if you go back 200 years, you're not going to find that many shrinks dealing with anxiety and depression.
I totally agree. I mean, I once read a speech delivered by the head of the U.S. Navy. He was a Jew. His name was, his name.
Rickover, Admiral Rickover?
Adam Rickover. Yeah, Adam Rickover. He became a 4-star, in the Navy, 4 stars like the highest level. He was, I think he escaped Europe before the war.
He was behind, I think, the
naval, they call him the nuclear naval,
yeah.
the nuclear navy he created.
Yeah.
But he gave an interesting talk. I found it fascinating. He says, it was in 1955. He was comparing 1855 to 1955, and he said that in 1855, 90% of energy generated in the world was through human effort, man labor. In 1955, 90% of energy is generated through machines. So he said two things happened as a result. First of all, wealth exploded, because now you can press a button and exponentially, then you need it to work in the field or whatever it may be. And the second thing, the birth of leisure, free time. Because you don't need to spend 8 hours in the hot sun getting a bushel of potatoes to eat. And that leisure, but he didn't focus a lot on the leisure. I said to myself, exactly, what happened to all that free time? How did we fill it?
No one has free time nowadays. Because they're pursuing happiness, and it's elusive.
But it's free time, and it's not based on real survival, so it's free time, and what are we doing with it? We're squandering it, right. Totally. And how could that, there's no way. I think another thing, I remember the Lubavitcher Rebbe saying, that the human nature is to produce. Adam la'om yavol. You have to produce. If you're not producing, you cannot be happy. It's like you're not living up to who you are. It's like a musician who's not allowed to play music, or anyone else with a talent. And the fact that we are, pursuing these extracurricular activities that we don't need, and not really living up to who we truly are, has to be a tremendous source of unhappiness. And therefore, again, filling it with all kinds of other superficial stuff. So what do we say to someone, let's say, sitting right here with us, who's gone through a tragedy, God forbid? What do you say to someone who's literally going through that? And, they're not interested in us pontificating about happiness and so on. How do you approach it as, from a Torah point of view, a Jewish point of view, that considers happiness to be the natural state of a human being?
Right. Obviously, in a person who's going through terrible suffering and comes to us for comfort, wants an embrace. They're not looking for philosophy. They're not looking for theology.
Right.
They're looking for an embrace. They want someone who's empathetic, someone who shows he cares or she cares and is willing to share their misery, their suffering, their pain. Because when people ask the question, I remember for decades people were asking, why did God allow the Holocaust or some other major tragedy?
Right.
And I always realized that if I tried to give an answer, they got more upset. And I realized that they're not asking a question. A child stubs its toe. What does it do? It cries to its mother. An adult doesn't cry mommy. Doesn't feel, well, I'm not going to cry. I'm an adult. So they ask questions, sophisticated questions. Why did God let this happen? They're really crying. Their soul is crying.
Good point. Yeah.
I want an embrace. God, give us an embrace. And that's really the only answer to the Holocaust, is to say, yes, we have every right to feel pain and to cry out to God, and God has to take us into his embrace. And that's what Mashiach is. Mashiach is where God embraces us after we suffered so much.
Yeah, I second that 100%, absolutely. I don't know who it was that said, a Rebbe once said to one of his suffering Chassidim who had suffered a great tragedy, he says, I don't have answers for you, but I can cry with you. And an interesting way, that crying with you gives strength. And in some ways, see, people think, again, joy, they think, and happiness is all external. If happy things are not happy, I'm not happy. But happiness is a soul state. It's a state of the soul. And that's what I see. When I see people, you're in awe of people who suffered, and they still maintain a certain dignity and presence, and they don't lose their faith, because it's in a deeper place. It's not just because something good happens to me, I'm happy, and if something bad happens to me, I'm not happy. There's a continuous, like a consistency that what I've always seen. And
I knew a Jew who was such a happy person, and then I discovered, he told us that he survived the Holocaust, he survived cancer, he survived severe heart problems, and his doctors were already gone, and this man was always happy. And I can guarantee you that the happiness contributed at least to some of his miracles of survival.
You remind me of an article I read a number of years ago. I remember it was some magazine about a guy that the doctors had diagnosed him that he only has 6 months to go. He came originally from Greece, so he decided, you know what, with his wife, let me go back to my homeland, to some island in the Greek islands, and live out my life there, back to where I came from. Anyway, he lived more than 6 months, more than 6 years, more than 20 years. So the writer of this article heard about him and went to find him. He wanted to see what's the secret of his longevity. So he came to this island and he sees everybody lives there in their deep 90s. So at first he thought maybe it's the climate, but he says other islands are not that way. It's not like the Mediterranean diet or something. And he discovered after spending time there that there are no clocks in the town. No one's rushing anywhere. Their main focus is being with each other. They farbring all day. And then they do some job. In other words, it's not measured on how much money you're making and so on. The whole town is that way. There's the deadline, that whole creation of that pressure, and people can just be with each other. They spend time talking to each other, socializing a lot with their children, with their grandchildren. Anyway, he came back to America, the writer, and went to interview the doctors, and they were all gone. So the doctors were long gone, and this guy's still. There's no question about it that there's. Everyone who says it when they go away from that urban dry, this craziness of this material world, everyone feels more at peace. But we're addicted. We are. It's an addiction.
A Jew who is totally involved, working hard, working 15 hours a day, and to eke out a meager living, and or whatever else they're doing, and they can't stop doing that, but they can still be happy if they start their day in the morning with saying Moda Ani. The first thing you do when you get up in the morning is you express gratitude that you're alive.
Right.
We take everything for granted. Right. That's another way of saying how you could be happy. Stop taking things for granted. Be grateful that you're alive. Be grateful that you're a human being, that you have a purpose. Be grateful that you're awake and that you're conscious, because there are a lot of human beings who are not conscious. And be grateful that you have the ability to serve God, to have a relationship with God. Be grateful that if, in the case of a Jewish person, that you're Jewish. Special status of being Jewish. Be grateful that you can do the mitzvot, that can fulfill the commandments, which connects you to God. Be grateful that you make mistakes and you can correct them. God accepts you, embraces you even after you made your mistakes. And be grateful that you're living now in an age when we're expecting imminently the coming of Mashiach. The whole world is going to change. And there's so many signs of it in society today. So, if you really think about it and you don't take any of these things for granted, you'll start dancing for joy. So you don't need to be on that island where you have no worries in the world and you're able to farbring all day, even if you're part of the rat race.
Yeah.
But you have perspective. You're really in a different world, even as you are in this physical world.
When the previous Chabad Rebbe was imprisoned and tortured, and he had plenty of reason to be sad, he says that when he contemplated on divine providence, that wherever you are, you need to be there, even if it's in a painful place. It's what gave him the strength to endure. Mm-hmm. Of course, he's a Rebbe, but you hear the stories of, he wrote a whole thing called Tractate from Hell, the Sechta Gehenna.
Right, but he told these stories because he wanted us to emulate him.
Absolutely. And but you hear how he dug deeper and found that spark, I guess, that strength that was able to get through anything. It's hard to really, I guess, capture in a test tube. But those people that have that resilience, that have that spirit, at the end of the day, it's the spiritual power of the soul that gives a person the fighting chance to deal with the challenges of life. Because, look, let's face it, even from a Torah Hasidic point of view, life is difficult. No one ever said that this life is going to be easy. Now, for some people, it's more difficult than others. But the mere fact the soul comes to this world, we're told, is not a pleasant thing. Shammai, the great sage, says it's more pleasant not to be born than to be born. But it's more purposeful to be born. And when you discover that purpose, it changes everything, Yeah.
Yeah, so what's the the conclusion
Takeaway.
is that everyone has to make an effort to be happy in a meaningful way. And I'm not going to say you shouldn't entertain yourself. You have to drink sometimes once in a while. Judaism allows you to drink some wine on a holiday where it's an artificial way of getting happy, but it only works because there's an internal happiness that helps to reveal. But if you don't have that internal happiness,
Yeah, of course.
it's
That's
just,
what I say. The drink is only to numb somewhat of the animal soul, so it shouldn't distract.
Right.
So you can access the inner
But
joy.
if you have no relationship with your godly soul, because we're never taught about God, about religion, about Judaism. And when I said religion, religion is really a contributing factor to unhappiness. If the religion is the wrong focus, because religion makes people feel guilty. Religion tells you about God's vengeance and everything's so negative. Judaism, especially
But that's a
within
false one. That's not the true definition.
Within the
of
Hasidic, especially within the Hasidic community, joy is like the essence of Judaism.
Yeah.
It's like, so one great Hasidic master said that the being depressed is not a sin. Technically, it doesn't say anywhere in the Torah, "Thou shalt not be depressed." But there's not one sin in the Torah that you won't commit through depression.
It's worse than a sin, right?
It's worse than a sin.
Yeah. They tell the story that Baal Shem Tov once went into a synagogue at Yom Kippur, and he hears the cantor singing a very joyous song. So he's wondering what part of the Yom Kippur service is so joyous. It's pretty serious. So there are sections where the high priest comes out of the Holy of Holies, and he notices, he's the confession of the sins. And the sins are quite pretty brutal, many of them. So he goes over to the cantor afterwards and says, I heard you singing a beautiful song, but how did you sing such a joyous song about the sins? It's not like some Torah material. So he says, what do you mean? Everyone has a job in the king's palace. Some people do one job. My job is to clean it up. I take a broom and I'm cleaning up the dust. What greater joyous experience is to clean the dust in the palace, to beautify it? So there's always the two sides to how you look at, the religion that's associated with neurosis and guilt and the punishment is we know that's not the Judaism that was meant to be. It's the way people distort it.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, absolutely. I would say, about happiness, I think living a life of purpose and meaning and service and giving and gratitude and not focusing on your happiness will produce the greatest happy person.
Right.
That's the end of the day. As soon as you make happiness as your objective, you're already in the wrong place. People, we don't appreciate today, things have to emerge. Not everything, you can't pull a flower out of the ground. Water the ground and the flower will grow. Happiness is an outgrowth of what you do that's right. And the more you focus on what you're doing, the right thing you should be doing, the happier you'll be. As soon as you make it a commodity, you're not going to find it on a shelf, and you're not going to find it anywhere. That's how I would, we've said it in different terms, but that's...
Right.
So I'm sure we can go on and talk about happiness forever and ever.
Right, and there are so many degrees of happiness. So when you reach one level, there's another higher level, a deeper level, and ultimately we'll get to that very soon with the coming of Mashiach.
Absolutely. Great talking to you, and great
Same
talking
here.
about this topic, happiness.
Should do this more often.
I feel happier right now already,
Well, that's one way of being happy, talking about happiness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, smiling.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.